My idea started with, in art class, we were watching a documentary on an artist named Olafur Eliasson. He's a Danish photographer, and we were writing an essay on him, and he works a lot with light and change over time. And I really liked the way he conveyed through his photography, the way he used light, and I decided I wanted to work with photography. So I took his idea and I decided to think of ways I could convey basically change over a large amount of time and different ways of using light. And at the time, I read a book called Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament of the Bible, and it had this really interesting phrase in it, there's nothing new under the sun. Basically, it's about the repetitiveness of culture and civilization through war and the human condition basically being the same and throughout history. And so I thought by conveying it across a sunrise, there is nothing new under the sun. It's quite literal, but philosophical at the same time, in the sense that it conveys that message through through this place at Cronulla along the Esplanade Walkway. And so I first was thinking of using a road and the cars travelling and to kind of convey that. And then I found this spot, and I thought the way the beach and the clouds in the sky and the sea depicted this, there is nothing new under the sun, as the sea and the subject matter is the same while the light changes. I thought it conveyed the message well. And yeah, so what was really interesting was printing it off. I hadn't actually, in my experience with photography, printed anything before, professionally, on a large scale. And eventually it ended up at about 60 photos. And the original work that I did was about 15 meters long, at about 60 photos. And obviously it needs to be condensed because it's too big, but it was interesting getting it printed off and on this paper and making it one long strip. And that was the interesting part. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. That's about it, really.
Extracts of Memories is meant to be a name, so it portrays my memories, but then again, all of you would have completely different memories, and these photographs might mean something completely different to you. This photo originally was up the top, and it sort of represented like the life. And down the very bottom, I had a photo of a cigarette in a bowl, which actually got omitted because of the Board of Studies requirements, you know, that sort of thing. But it was sort of like a journey from life to death to, like, as you look at the photo, as you go down. I edited all the photos. It took me a very long time. I must have spent about 100 hours in the photo lab, like in the computer lab at school. And it's mounted on this foam board. I wanted it to look professional and be sort of like not happy snaps, like not look like I had just sort of gone out and taken them, and really enforce the concept of the work. The amount of photos originally, when I submitted it, there were 111 photos, and it was very hard trying to find subject matter that was different. Like, I have a lot of photos are from the same area, and it was just hard editing them all, trying to fit them in the square crop, and just overall getting it mounted was difficult. The stress of printing it and trying not to let it make bubbles or get it stuffed up, so I'd have to reprint it, and just the whole journey was very stressful, but I got there. So.
Well, my body of work explores the concept of like family connections and family ties, which I've chosen to represent through like an oil painting of 3 generations of people. So it's my grandfather, mom, and baby brother. I think the thing that influenced me the most was my brother's birth earlier last year, because it was a really life-changing experience. because I'm now like a full-time babysitter kind of thing. And also I wanted to capture this, progression from, the hopes of new life right through to like the frailty of old age and things like that. At first, my art teacher suggested that I just do a big family portrait to show how his birth influenced our lives, but I wanted to make it more conceptual, so I decided to work with this family ties concept, which is, I guess, really traditional to the Chinese culture. And other than that, I was also influenced by the Chinese artist Zhang Xiaogang, especially his Bloodline series. As you can see here, the red line is quite subtle because you can only see it when you look at it closer, but I think that really makes my work, it connects the three works together, because before that, I actually didn't have the red line until the very end, and as my teacher said, it looked really bland, I guess, because there wasn't a noticeable connection between the works. But now, yeah. I think another thing is the window in the backgrounds, which I guess to me represents like a sense of connection, because well, beyond those windows are like scenes which I've selected, like painted based on some old photos. For example, the one behind my grandfather was actually from a photo of his hometown in China, while the one behind my mom is just based on like a photo of Australian suburbia. So I guess you can see it as like, despite being in two lands, it's kind of, the family bond is still very strong, and yeah, I think that's about it.
Okay, so basically my work tries to comment on the nature of fame by comparing musicians to the likes of religious icons such as Jesus Christ. So I've put passages underneath each of them that describe Jesus as being a particularly influential and powerful figure, as if they're referring to these musicians. Conceptually, my inspiration mainly came from John Lennon, actually, who was quoted saying that the Beatles were bigger than Jesus, which caused a lot of controversy at the time, but it also shows the power that musicians can have over their audience. And another artist that was particularly inspirational to me was Ryan McGinley, who followed around the Smiths on one of their tours, taking photographs of him and his fans. And I really liked his use of colour and light, and I think that's why my photographs turned out to be so vibrant in the end. Although not being particularly religious myself, religion has always interested me, and the effect it has on people and why people believe the things that they do. I started going to shows when I was very young and taking photos. I've always taken an interest in bands. They've always been particularly a big part of my life. And I was lucky enough last year to be chosen to be the event photographer for a local band competition, which is where most of the photos came from. And when I was developing my concept, I started to notice that some of these photos had particularly ethereal qualities, and that's when the ideas started to come together. So I decided to place them in ornate frames and present them as an image of Jesus Christ would traditionally be presented. And yeah, all the techniques are in camera, so there was no after effects done. It's all just what came out of the camera, and that's about it.
Cordis is the Latin term for to remember, and it literally means to pass through the heart again in Latin. So it's pretty much an exploration of my memories, and mainly around the journeys of migration from being born in Uruguay and raised in Uruguay. So it's a collection of works, sculpture, video and painting on the back of the drapery. You probably can't see it from there, but the back it has 3 different plane tickets or boarding passes. The middle one is from my first trip to Australia. The one on the left is when I went back to Uruguay, and this one is when I returned to Australia again. So it's pretty much telling a story of my journey as an immigrant. I've chosen silicon for the sculpture. It was a very complicated process of light casting, both in the hands and feet and the face as well. The face was very challenging, having to have an arginate, which is a product that you mix to get a replicate of a body part. And I had to have that in my face for about half an hour, kind of having to hold my breath. That was pretty difficult. And well, the hair is punched in with a needle, and I also had to learn how to use makeup for the face, and yes. And the video is both a collection of family videos of when I was a kid with my family in Uruguay, and a mixture of Super 8 recordings as well, and Super 8 film for that for the old effect, again relating to memories. And yeah, that's pretty much about it.
My work is a very scientific and mathematical work, and it's based on the idea of a self-replicating machine. And the idea is if you have enough resources or raw materials such as metal and rubber and other stuff and other elements of whatnot you need, and you have a machine that is capable of, using those materials to create something, you could get that machine to create a duplicate of itself. And then you could get those two to duplicate themselves. And you'd have 1, then 2, then 4, then 8, then 16, then 32, and before you know it, you've got over 16 million of the things. And it rises exponentially, so the longer it runs, the more and more and more and more of these machines are. And so it also repeats section of the film throughout the thing. So it, repeat replication sort of thing. You get to see the same sort of footage of it assembling at different stages of the construction process. And the way I did this was obviously very different to what most other people have done with their artworks and so on. Rather than getting all messy and so on with paint and other whatnot, I just sat at a computer and basically just typed away for afternoons. And it's very nice in the sense that you can have like an undo button and so on in case things go wrong, but then you have the other trouble of corrupt files and things not working and computers crashing, and it was quite an experience making it. And yeah, I didn't really have any help from any mentors or anything. I was one of those students that just sat in the back corner of the classroom and just did their work, especially since my art teacher didn't really have any knowledge that could help me at this stage, because most of them aren't quite experienced in this area yet. They might eventually be. And yes, it was quite interesting to try and develop this work, and there were a lot of things I had to cut out, which I'm very disappointed about, to fit it within the 6-minute time frame. And there were a lot of other things as well that I didn't get to include as well, such as I wanted to show even smaller in-between stages. For example, one of the sections where it simply drills into the screws into the main body, I wanted to have a scene where it would actually get the metal cube that it started with, use the laser to melt it into a pile of molten steel and so on, and then mould that into the shape of a screw, and then use that screw to screw it in. But unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to go into that amount of detail. But actually, if I'd started at the start of the year, I probably might have enough time to do a bit better job, but I flicked through about 8 ideas before I finally settled on this one with only a few months to go. So I'm actually pretty amazed that I got it done in time. So really sort of still shocked at that. Yes, when you go and create the scene, you have to take a lot of things into consideration, because you create everything from scratch. So you first have to start creating the objects you want in this world. So you start off with nothing but just their form. The next step is applying materials to these objects, such as giving them textures, making the tanks bright blue, or the ceiling the dark grey, or the metal nice and shiny and reflective. And then the final stage, or not quite the final stage, this next stage is we go through and light the whole thing. So you go through and you create lights everywhere where there are necessary lights in the scene and so on. So when it's using the laser beam, you have a red light there, and of course you've got the huge fluorescent light array above the whole thing. And then, the fourth step, is finally rendering. And you hit the go button, and basically the computer sits there for hours. It just churns out images. And that animation there is comprised of about 9,000 images that the computers just sat there and ran overnight for a number of months, just producing the animation for me. And there, you just whack it all together finally in a video editing program, and you're done.